Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome back to day 5 of Oncology Pharmacy Conclave 2025, an immersive event that focuses on cutting edge oncology therapeutics, evidence based clinical decision making, and collaborative multidisciplinary strategies. This conclave brings together a distinguished faculty of medical oncologists, clinical pharmacists, dietitians, and yoga physicians. This is Rachana, and I'm very excited to be host for today's event. So, without any ado, let's begin today's session titled Nutrition as a Therapeutic Tool in Cancer Management, where we'll be learning about targeted nutrition and dietary strategies to support cancer treatment, helping improving strength, manage side effects, enhance immunity, and potentially improve treatment outcomes. And the speaker for the session is Dr. Sharanya Shastri. And it is honored to introduce Dr. Sharanya Shastri, who is a preventive and clinical nutritionist with a special interest in sports nutrition. She holds double master degrees, one in therapeutic dietetics and applied nutrition from Manipal, Udupi, and the other in sports nutrition and exercise performance from IIST Pune. She has also completed a prestigious fellowship in sports nutrition from IIT Chennai. She has worked across leading institutions, including St. John's Medical College, Apollo Spectra Hospitals, and Sports Authority of India, gaining hands-on experience with both clinical cases and national level athletes. She has co-authored the nationally released book Are You a Vegetarian Suffering from Food Intolerance? And has contributed a chapter on nutrition in cancer in the book Society of Prevention of Cancer. A published author, corporate speaker, and a contributor to major national newspapers and magazines, and she is also known for her science-driven approach to preventive health, women's wellness, and athlete performance. And it is truly an honor to welcome you, ma'am. Before we begin, I would like everyone to inform that we'll have a Q&A session after this, so please keep your questions ready. And the stage is all yours, ma'am. We welcome you.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for a very nice introduction. So I will quickly share my screen. Please let me know if it's visible or if there are any issues, right? Is the slide visible?
No
Not yet?
slide is not visible. The Zoom
Okay.
screen is visible.
Okay. Can you see
Yes,
the
ma'am. It is.
presentation? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Okay, great. Uh, so as we all know, I mean, cancer is something that is really on a rise in India, and everybody has a lot of things to talk about cancer. We have so much of social media in our around us. We have so many, influencers and social media people. So what really is needed from nutrition? Because as of today, everybody has a view. Everybody tells that you have to eat this. We have long WhatsApp forwards coming in on our phones, so we really don't know which is authentic, which is scientific. We have so many people putting up their videos, their opinions, their perspectives. So what are we talking about today is something which has to be which is already science driven, which is research oriented. So importance of nutrition across cancer care, right? And what is the prevention, and how do you treat, and what is the link? Because so many new information is around. So is it even new, or is it just an old pattern which is repeating, or does it really even have any sense? Because so many times, there are random messages. I get random forwards and people ask me if this is true, right? So in India, what is relevant? Because so many things, there are so much of information, but not everything may be relatable in an Indian scenario. Because obviously the geography differs. Then there are people, the ethnicity which is changing, the weather or the climate, right? So what is there in North India may not be really appreciated or followed in down South India, for example. So these are the things that we are going to talk about today, and I'll be taking questions at the end with, if you have any questions. So starting with the burden of cancer. So, India is already known as the diabetic capital, as we all know, because at least every 5 people or 6 people are turning diabetic due to lifestyle and stress related problems. But now the biggest concern is whatever we call as lifestyle disorders. So cancer has also gotten into one of these categories. So earlier, there was a kind of a probably an understanding where only people who had a bad lifestyle or only people who were into some kind of an abuse like alcohol abuse or drug abuse were getting cancers. But today we see that somebody who's never, who's had a very great lifestyle but still who's never succumbed to any of these abuses are still developing cancer. So this is a very concerning and not a great thing in today's scenario. So the rising incidence, especially in women, breast cancer is very common. Then we have colorectal cancers, oral cancers, and stomach cancers. So in this, 30 to 35%, which is a very big number, okay, is contributed because of our faulty diet, our obesity, and inactivity. So obesity directly, yes. Inactivity here, I mean, is a very sedentary lifestyle. Sedentary need not be just sitting in one place. Sedentary in terms of even the kind of exercise we do. There are a lot of people who say that I work out for 1.5 hours in the gym, but after that the whole day they're just sedentary. They're sitting in one place, the activity levels are lower, they are just glued to their desks, they're working, they're very stressed out. They might be doing night duties, they might be taking late night calls, consuming a lot of caffeine, you're in meetings. So this also is sedentary because you're just exerting yourself for 1 hour at a stretch, and after which for the rest of the hours you're just glued to one place. And the biggest thing is your diet, right? So we don't know in today's world as it is, we have no idea of what kind of food comes to our plate, because we all live in metropolitan cities. We don't know where are we really getting our milk from. Naturally, everybody will not have access to a cow, so it comes in a packet. Sometimes you're buying curd in a packet. So these are all inevitable things, because now you and I do not have the time to go and search of a cow and get milk. So there are so many such inevitable things. But apart from that, now we have the access to Swiggy, Zomato, Zepto. In minutes food reaches our plate. And sometimes you're so lazy, and sometimes we're very stressed, and we have so many reasons to say why we ordered on Swiggy, or why we did a Blinkit or a Zepto. So these are the things consciously which is contributing to the 30 to 35% according to the ICMR. So cultural dietary challenges, which is again, like I'm talking about, the refined carbs coming. So carb is not just about, a lot of people I see cut down the sugar in form of a sweet, the natural homemade sweet, or the sugar probably in a coffee or a tea, saying that they're on a diet and this is not good. But whereas on the other hand, you end up having a pastry once in a week, or you're probably indulging on alcohol. And then, so this kind of a cultural challenge. Earlier, whatever you would be made at home, like your mother prepares a sweet, now it's winter season, sometimes you're having a roti and a saag, and or maybe you're having a firni, which is a seasonal thing, or sometimes you're having any seasonal sweet. We used to indulge in that because that was homemade, that was it comes with a shelf life. It's not something which is kept in a refrigerator for a longer time, it's not frozen, it's not processed. But now we cut down in the name of calories on those things which are made at home, or probably you and I don't even have the time to make it at home. But then we indulge once a week in a party. We we go out and have a dinner, and probably sometimes we are having late dinners, we're having late parties where your sleep is getting affected, where our eating time is getting affected, right? So these are the cultural challenges, or the cultural changes that have come with changing times. So where we have obviously refined carbs coming in, so whenever there's a late dinner, there are obviously carbs coming in, and then we have low protein, and then we have everything which is high on omega 6, because wherever you go, whether it's a hotel or whether it's a, party, I'm sure the food is not prepared then and there. It's something which is prepared and kept, whether it's a buffet system or whether it's something you're going out, on a vacation. So we end up carrying a lot of package stuff, right? Like whether it's in the form of chips or probably a biscuit packet, right? So this is the new culture that has set in, where cooking at home has gone down due to various reasons, and we are now succumbing to a lot of foods that come in packets. So certain things are inevitable and certain things are, our own choice. So this is an actual burden, and this is a change in the dietary world also, because social media and every product based company always promotes their own package systems, right? You have everything coming in packets, so where the cooking or engagement of, cooking at home decreases, right? So this is a bigger realistic practical problem in today's scenario. So nutrition as a therapeutic tool in the science. So nutrition has always been the base. So whether you talk about a hormonal issue, whether you talk about something as grave as cancer, or whether you talk about a simple lifestyle related management, now, people are even connecting the gut and the brain, and they say that your mood is also dependent on your gut, and the gut health is the talk of the town. You go to anybody now, they only tell you one thing, that you please repair your gut, right? So nutrition was always the base. It has been the base, it will always be the base. It's just that maybe you and I took a long time to give it a scientific term, and maybe to understand the science behind it. So, but again, nutrition is again very commonly used. It's abused by a lot of people, because anybody and everybody, has an opinion and has a perspective to it. So the Harvard School of Public Health says that diet modulates systemic inflammation, oxidative stress, and gut microbiome. So which means that your diet, okay, the diet is not, I'm not talking about a diet with a specific calorie. I'm talking about a balanced diet, a diet that you've been following, right, over a period of time, is responsible for these factors. So I am sure inflammation is a big word now after all the Vidya Balan interview has gone viral. But even before that, these studies were done, and oxidative stress and systemic inflammation and gut microbiome theories were there. But now that people are more aware of it, maybe everybody is linking it, to themselves, but it's not necessarily applicable to all. So, gut, like I said, is now the second brain, and your gut health decides your immunity, and that decides your maybe everything, your mood to your weight to your hormones. I mean, your gut is your home, right? So nutrient density improves treatment tolerance. So this is very important. A lot of times in my practice, when I was working in the St. John's, Bangalore, so I have seen that people are not aware of, the importance of nutrition when somebody is undergoing a cancer therapy. So there are multiple reasons to it. See, psychologically, a person can be low, and they're already very depressed, with the ongoing treatment. But nutrition plays a very important role, because so many times there are so many side effects which are caused by the, therapy, which can be taken care by correct nutrition. But the intervention at the right time is important. This is like, you build a house. So when you get to know that there is a problem, so I always, tell people that you have a consultation with your dietitian as per your needs. It cannot be like a one size fits all. So when you get to know, so simultaneously, when both a medical treatment and your nutrition, it's called MNT, that is medical nutrition therapy, is happening, then your body responds very, I can say, responsibly. What happens in most of the cases is, we as dietitians enter into the picture only at a later stage, where somebody is already diagnosed, they are already on chemotherapy, they would have already probably undergone a surgery, the cancer would have, the bit of it which can be removed would have been, surgically extracted, after which they will be undergoing chemo, and then we enter. So by then, nutritionally, they're already very weak, the nutritional profile is so weak. And and they already have many problems, they have many side effects, they have uneasiness, and they're already psychologically also not in a very great receptive frame. So that time the intervention takes a lot of time. So whenever, at least in my practice, to my best ability, I try and intervene from day one, because this is like building a base. Why? Because there are many pathways, even scientifically influenced, I mean, which cause a big change. So you have the immune modulation, you have the DNA repair, you have the oxidative balance, all these things, and sarcopenia prevention, because most of the cancer patients, whichever cancer, irrespective, they end up losing a lot of muscle. So intervention has to happen right at the beginning. When you go at a later stage, it is very difficult for you for it to show results, because this is not a normal individual with a normal kind of a metabolism. There is a lot of breakdown happening, there is a lot of muscle breakdown, there's a lot of, so many factors coming into picture, the medicines, the kind of medications they're on. So that is why intervention at the very beginning is important. And please do recommend people, if you know somebody among your peers or family who are suffering or who are in the early stages, to have a consultation so you have the base strong. So, Ayurvedic perspective on cancer. So, this is just to say that cancer is not new in Indian textbooks or in Indian theories. So, even the ancient science, which is our Ayurveda, also talks about cancer in different terminologies. Maybe the language is different because it's mostly Sanskrit, but otherwise, the kind of modern allopathy, whatever the concepts we have here, it is very much in sync with the ancient Ayurvedic perspective. So, whether you're talking about these lightning therapies during acute inflammation, which is nothing but your radiation, whether it's about the nourishing foods during depletion, or whether it is about, preserving the immunity, these are all the similar things which are even there from our ancient science. So, maybe now the Westerners have made it very popular because now Harvard is publishing these studies, or there are a lot of research happening in the Western countries, specifically US. But I'm just trying to say that this is not new to the Indian textbooks at all, right? I mean, Indians have always had an upper hand in any field, whether it's mathematics to medicine to astrology, when it came to, probably having a knowledge about it. So, foods recommended in Ayurveda back then were about green gram, your buttermilk, your medicated ghee. Medicated ghee is the one which is, prepared at home in a very not in a very sophisticated, but in a very normal, clean, hygienic condition, right? And barley. These were the things which Ayurvedic textbooks even now talk about, and even most of the Ayurvedic practitioners may inculcate these things in their treatment of cancer. So, goals of nutrition therapy in cancer. So, the main thing, like I said, maintaining the muscle mass and functional strength is very important, because here a person is not in their normal lifestyle. You cannot expect him or her to exercise, or, to be very physically involved or engaged, and also probably eat the right kind of food, because sometimes they have nausea, sometimes they have so many problems. There are no taste buds, they don't feel like eating something. Sometimes it's also the psychology which plays a very important role. You're not in a good frame. So it's very, very important that muscle mass has to be maintained, and you prevent malnutrition and sarcopenia. The second important thing is restoring the gut integrity, because when you're on so many medications, your gut is taking the load, right? So you have to make sure that the gut is intact. Otherwise, what happens is, like I said, they're already immunocompromised. So the weaker the gut, there are more deficiencies. There can be a B12 deficiency, there can be a vitamin D deficiency. We'll talk about that as we go through. And then there are obviously the complications. We'll again talk about it, which is, the common side effects that all of us know: nausea, mucositis, and then fatigue, all of these things. So basically, the main two important goals will be the first and the second, which is muscle mass, prevention of malnutrition, and making sure that the muscle is intact, and also restoring the gut integrity. And of course, with all of this, we want to have make sure that they have a good quality life. That's all we want, right, at the end of the day. So, malnutrition and sarcopenia in Indian cancer patients. So, Indian studies say 60 to 70% cancer patients present with malnutrition. So, malnutrition is not necessarily where you imagine an African kind of a picture. It's not that. Malnutrition in terms of nutrients. So many times they do not eat because they do not feel like eating, or they have nausea. Sometimes they do not have access, right? Because you're traveling, you're going to the hospital, you're not liking the hospital food. There are so many reasons. So with this, what happens, the intake becomes very low, and the quality of food that you eat is also a bigger factor. The bioavailability of the nutrients is a bigger factor. So 60 to 70% of the patients, unfortunately, this is not a very good number, but they are malnourished in terms of the micronutrient deficiency. Common causes, like I said, anorexia, early satiety, gastritis, diarrhea, all of these. Sometimes it can be medication induced, sometimes it's just, body doesn't accept. So, low protein Indian diets obviously worsen the muscle loss. So, the importance of early nutritional screening. So, this is what we call it as PGSGA. So, there are different nutritional tools, which are used for every medical condition. So, when you do a nutritional screening, that is why I said the base is very important. Intervention at the right time is important. Not when, as a dietitian, you cannot go at the end of the chemotherapy and then say, I will do something. So right from the beginning, when a person is detected, having a consultation, doing a nutritional screening because is important, because then you understand a lot of factors. You understand the person's lifestyle, you understand how that person, landed up in this situation. What was the lifestyle before, what is it now? There are, because food is something which connects a lot of things. Food is never it's never an individual story. It's always about, food is dependent on a lot of things. So who are the people living with you? Can somebody cook for you? Are you on your own? Are you a working professional? These are the things which really matter. And then, what about your stamina? Do you have the energy? What changed, once you got diagnosed with this condition? How much of weight have you lost? What is your current, nutrient intake? Do you have any, allergies? Do you have any problems? All these things existing. Do you have a medical history? All these things come when you do an early nutritional screening and you understand the person better, right? So instead of going later and talking to somebody who's already in pain, you start and talk to that person right from the beginning. You understand his or her journey better, and you can add more value uh, that time. So, anti-inflammatory diet is therapy. So, this is again based on a Harvard and Indian study. So, this is now the, inflammation, like I said, is a big word. Everybody talks about anti-inflammatory stuff. But again, this anti-inflammatory therapy or the diet is going to work when you really curate it as per your needs. These foods which I have mentioned here are definitely, good in treating cancers or in healing. I would say in healing, or in providing antioxidants, so that it reduces the inflammatory markers, because inflammation can happen due to many reasons. So especially in a condition like cancer, where there is so much of breakdown of everything, and especially the muscle, and there are so many drugs, medicines which are given, so there can be inflammation, which is a normal thing, right, as a normal side effect. But in order to reduce these inflammation or the inflammatory markers, these foods that I have mentioned are supposed to be taken in a specific quantity and as per their requirement, and depending on the type of cancer that the person is diagnosed with. So but off late, you see everybody is saying drink turmeric, that have pepper, have berries, have, I think in the West now the cinnamon shot is a very famous thing after COVID. You have to people take curcumin tablets just randomly over the counter, people are taking. So this is an abuse, because you really don't know if you need it, right? Simply, I'm just bombarding as in when I like something, go purchase it over the counter because it looks fancy, because it comes in big nice boxes. So this has to be really addressed. But what a person who's really undergoing a cancer treatment, depending on the type of cancer, depending on his nutritional screening, like the PGSJ I'm talking about, then in what proportion that person, can handle it is important. Because somebody who has a probably an gastric issue or an acidity issue cannot probably handle something like a turmeric with milk with pepper, or somebody who has an esophageal virus who's having problem with his upper GI cannot handle something like ginger or garlic. So these things have to be really discussed. It just cannot be like, people Google, they see anti-inflammatory foods with foods which are good for cancer, and then you have so many foods which are listed. So this is something that we really need to be mindful about. But yes, these foods that are mentioned here do have certain components in them which are antioxidants and which are anti-inflammatory in nature. But the proportion and to whom it has to be given has to be curated. Okay. So protein requirements. So this is a very big important thing. So everything in cancer becomes extra important, whether it is the kind of carbs you eat, the kind of fat you eat, the kind of micronutrients you take. Protein is not just an it's sometimes overhyped here. When you talk about even weight loss, people talk about protein. When you're talking about bodybuilding, people talk about protein. When you talk about nephro health, people talk about protein. So protein on the whole is a very overhyped nutrient. But here in cancer, it is important because here we have to prevent sarcopenia or malnutrition. So again, here, as per the ESPEN guidelines and the Harvard guidelines, we need to step up the protein, definitely. But that doesn't mean that you just simply randomly give somebody a high protein diet. It depends totally on if a person can handle it. Because somebody who is not able to eat 2 3 meals a day, cannot take a supplement or cannot handle a heavy, dal curd or a dal chawal combination. It's impossible. So that is why you need to prepare the body from the beginning. And that is why I again come back, and I'm sounding a little repetitive when I say that you need to do the intervention right from the beginning. You need to do a screening of that person, because when you do a screening at the beginning, you understand what a person's average intake is, right? So you understand how much a person was eating before, what was his normal intake, and now maybe after the detection of cancer, what has changed. Depending on that, you can alter, or you can maybe taper down, or you can increase your protein through different sources. Just because I have to give somebody a high protein diet doesn't mean I just give randomly 1.2 gram of protein per kg body weight and stuff him with so much of protein. That will again give you gut disturbances, nausea, bloating, and whatnot, right? But the fact is, there are obviously protein gaps in an average Indian diet, because an average intake is only about 0.6 gram per kg per day. And now the latest thing is we say 0.8 gram per kg per day. Ideally, in India or in Asian population, it's 1 gram. But yes, these are the practical gaps, but that doesn't mean that you just stuff people with protein and protein. So please be a little sensitive, and I think we need to be a little empathetic in such situations where we really understand the real problem. Just because somebody, so many times I have seen this where people are randomly giving a diet template and saying eat, dal chawal, and then sham ko there is evening mein there is a sprout. It's not possible. Somebody who is it's just a very theoretical thing. Practically, that person, if his or her appetite has gone down over a period of time, he will not be able to eat it. So that is why it's very important that you understand a person's earlier requirement. How much was it? How much has he or she deteriorated? And then you push it in different forms, right? Not just like, yeah, I give a moong khichdi and then there is sprout and then there is curd rice and there are seeds and there is a supplement. No, that's not how it works. But yes, protein is definitely very important, but the way you give the different forms of protein, the bioavailability, and the person's appetite, the person's capacity really matters. So carbohydrates, again, like I said, there are everything which is important. So choosing the right ones. So always an Indian staple. So always keep the person close to his staple, because then the compliance is going to be better. I'm a South Indian, you give me rice, my compliance to it will be better. I'm a North Indian, you give me roti or you give me my staple, my compliance is better. You do ulta of it. Definitely, even as a normal person, our compliance is not going to be better, or we will, definitely retaliate. But in especially if you're undergoing sorry, a medical condition, naturally you will not be accepting new things. And especially in a situation, in a condition like cancer, food should be the last thing that a person has to stress about, because there are already so many stressors in his or her life. So the food, what has to be eaten, what has to be cooked, should be the least the least thing which has to stress somebody out. But choosing the right kind of the staple is important. Now if I'm a rice eater, you can make a little bit of change in the kind of rice I take or in the portion of rice I take. Maybe you can introduce a millet once in a week slowly, depending on my gut health, my tolerance. Maybe you can change the portion of rice, maybe you can change the method of cooking of rice. These are the things what we can do as professionals, and not just change the entire pattern, because this supports a stable glucose level and that reduces cancer related fatigue. Okay, because our body ultimately needs glucose, that's the key, that is how the whole body is designed, the physiology is designed. So we need good energy. So in order to maintain the good energy, as in I'm not talking about the spike kind of an energy, but a stable energy, right? So this is how we choose the staple, and always keep the person close to his staple food, and do not try to change a lot of the diet. So fat, again, a very important component, but a lot of us underestimate or probably degrade this word. So fat is always seen as a very bad word. So even if you call somebody fat, people get offended. Be fat, even in general, people say, oh, no ghee, no butter. People have a very different perspective towards fat. So again, study backs up, says omega-3 reduces inflammation and muscle wasting. Of late, people have realized that, so that is why all of them, especially the youngsters, are popping up omega-3 pills randomly over the counter. But omega-3 is definitely available through food. So it's important for us to know what to have, whether it's 1 teaspoon of flaxseed, whether it's just 5 to 7 soaked walnuts, whether it's sorry, mustard oil or any cold pressed oil or any local available oil in your vicinity, right? You do not need olive oil, you do not need mustard oil if you're sitting in Bangalore or in any part of South India. You stick to the locally available oil, which is unrefined. So these are best for your anti-inflammation, and they're very good for your hair, skin. You do not have to take omega-3 that time. You do not need vitamin E creams. You do not have to worry about your hair, skin, and your glow on the face. So fish oil 1 to 2 grams a day with EPA DHA with meals. So these supplements come into play only when somebody cannot have access, or if somebody cannot afford these things. But I'm sure all of us can afford a flaxseed or a walnut than buying a supplement. So it's a very dicey situation when to use a supplement and when not to, especially in a cancer patient. So try as much as possible to always include natural sources, because they are easy and they are not as complicated as when you take a supplement, because a supplement cannot just be taken like how we just take like a paracetamol or anything. So ideally it has to be, again, customized, it has to be supervised. It's not something that you just take like a mithai and just have it like that because somebody on Instagram or somebody of your neighbor or some friend of yours told you. So there are few micronutrients which I was talking about, which can cause a lot of nutrient deficiencies among cancer patients. Vitamin D, very importantly, B12, folate, zinc. So we will see these as we go through. Vitamin D is, as it is deficient in most of us, irrespective of whether we are a cancer patient. But among cancer patients, very sadly, again, this is a big number. More than 80% of them are deficient naturally, because geography is one big thing. Plus, when these patients, they don't go out and they're usually inside, they're indoors. So it's obvious that these vitamins are taking a hit. Not only because of that, again, the food that they eat, if it's not well balanced, there is no enough vitamin D available from food, so the absorption doesn't happen. So vitamin D, calcium and B12 are like a triad, so So they are all dependent on each other. So the minute one goes down, the other gets affected. So why vitamin D is important, that all of us know. That is for immunity, reduces fatigue, muscle strength. So sources, yes, sunlight, but again, depending on which part of the country you live in. But very importantly, the fortified milk or vitamin D fortified products. Mushrooms, again, it depends on the kind of mushrooms in curd, homestead. So mostly vitamin D supplementation is given for these people because if they are at the earlier stages, then definitely the oral intake is encouraged. But again, depending on the person's tolerance, so sometimes we do give them supplements. So the best absorbed, obviously, all we all know that vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamins, always best absorbed with a fat soluble meal. So that is why we say you have a glass of milk and take the tablet, or you have a curd or a bowl of yogurt, all of these things. Vitamin B12 and folate, again, Indians are at high risk. So earlier there was I think an opinion that only the vegetarians are at a risk of are at a risk at vitamin B12 deficiency. But honestly, when you see, it's not so true. Even non-vegetarians do have vitamin B12 deficiency. That's what I have seen in my practice. So I think it only depends on your diet, your lifestyle, your everything. So, especially in cancer patients, again, this plays a very important role. So, please do include these foods which I have mentioned here. Again, if you are not able to, then the dosage, the specific are is specified here. So, there are certain specific locally available foods. So, this is something again which we have to focus on. So, like for example, banana stem, they are very good sources of folate. So again, chana rajma is more of a North Indian thing that I'm sure all of you here who belong to the North understand. So these kind of things like banana stem, banana plantain, these are very locally available. Similarly, in the North, you have singada, which is mostly available in the North. Uh, I think nowadays it's available even in cities like Bangalore and Chennai. But these locally available things which are which do not again have an English name or an English equivalent will be very rich in antioxidants. So somebody who is having any of these conditions, always try and rely on your local cuisine. But it doesn't mean that you just go and eat any herb and any leaf. You need to kind of get it verified through somebody who's a professional, because all these leafy things or these herbal things do come with their own side effects. But what I'm trying to say is try to stay as close to your local cuisine as possible, or try to eat those things which you have grown up eating, because your body is already wired to that. Your gut responds very well to it. So what I'm trying to say in short is, you do not need a very expensive avocado or a very expensive broccoli to keep the folate levels. You just need simple foods like methi, banana stem, rajma, chana, wherever, whichever part of the country you belong to. Zinc and selenium. Again, zinc, selenium play a very important role in wound healing, metabolism, people with thyroid issues, people with immunity. Again, they are very good sources for everything, whether it's even as simple as, like I said, immunity. So I still remember when everybody was taking a zinc tablet immediately after COVID or during the COVID era. So zinc again, of late has again gained popularity, all these things, but because of this. But this has always been there. So earlier, if you remember, that is why our grandmothers would always have that, evenings made 2 to 3 cashew nuts, just like that. And then sometimes they have this Brazil nut is a fancy version again, which is now contributing to a lot of selenium. But there was sesame laddu that is being made. Then there is, all the, especially the festival like Sankranti celebrates a lot of sesame. Winters up in the north again use a lot of sesame in their diet, where you have good gajak and all of these things. So these things were the base. So that time people, like I said, did not know that this is zinc, this is selenium, and this is that and this. But now we have fancy terms, we have science which is here to explain, everything. So these things are needed whether you are already on cancer treatment or whether you are trying to prevent cancer. So this is a very important therapeutic because there's a lot of wound that happens, or inflammation or oxidative stress. So do give your people, if they are a cancer survivor or if they are on treatment, these small things you can give them 2 to 3 cashews. You can give them a small sesame laddu, again depending on their medical history. So please have a consultation and get that verified, but these are very good sources. But yes, somebody again, in case they're not able to have it naturally, then yes, there is a supplement for this. So curcumin, so this is again a very very hot selling thing. So like I said, I have somebody in the US who pops curcumin tablet every day. So I find it funny because curcumin is nothing but your, it's present basically your haldi, right? Turmeric. So turmeric is used in everything. Turmeric is like a basic spice in the Indian cooking system. I'm sure all of you who know to cook here will appreciate this, that turmeric is there in dal, sabzi, doodh, everything. So but again, only after it comes from the west, we understand that it's so beneficial, and people start taking curcumin tablets, curcumin whatnot. So simple stuff, add turmeric in everything, even for a cancer patient. Please see the sensitivity, because sometimes they might feel it's very spicy, so the flavor has to be adjusted, right? But do not stop using these things, and do not unnecessarily give a supplement. If it can be done naturally, then let it be done naturally. But yeah, it totally depends on one person's tolerance, their taste buds, the kind of therapy that they are on, the kind of cancer that they have. Like I said, if it's an upper GI or something, then it's very very important that you taper it down. It's mild, it cannot just give a burning sensation. But yes, curcumin is again a very hot selling one. Gut health and microbiome, like I said in the very beginning, this is like the talk of the town. Everybody talks to you on gut health. You have people promoting a lot of gut related tests. Athletes are talking to you, the celebrities talk to you about gut health. So yes, this is nothing new. This is always something that we have been doing, especially if you're a South Indian here. You appreciate the fact that any banana leaf meal always ends with a curd rice. Or even, pehle se your dadi or nani would have told you that have a little bit of curd at the end, right? And if you remember, or if you have this practice, if you're going to an exam, before going to an exam, you're always given that little bit of dahi and curd and that chini, that sugar. So these are the things which are done, which probably did not have a name then, which is always trying to keep your gut calm. So the same thing here, even for a person who is on cancer treatment, there's a lot of disturbance internally, gut wise, psychologically. So it's important that you calm their gut. So simple stuff like, simple homemade curd, homemade buttermilk, fermented foods like idli, dosa, all these things are very good. So, but yes, how much and if they can take or not, that depends totally on the individual. So, but yes, the gut really plays an important role, but there's no specific one particular thing that you need to do for a gut, because off late you have so many people giving you a lot of these sachets and probiotics. So you don't need those things, as long as you know cooking, you know where your kitchen is in the house, and you know what to have. Simple things can make a big difference, right? Hydration and electrolytes play a very important role again in cancer patients, because it's very very important. So many times they get dehydrated. Sometimes it's chemo induced, like vomiting, diarrhea. So in such cases, please keep it simple. A lot of times I have seen people drink a lot of juices. This I have seen in my own practice. So these juices and sodas, especially juice, creates more problem, because you don't know who is making that juice. If the juice, if it is especially in a package, if it's a packed one, if it's the canned one, again there's a lot of extra preservative sugar coming. It again makes them feel more nauseous. So keep it very simple, keep it simple, like as simple as rice porridge or an ORS or coconut water. Don't load them with a lot of juices and juices, because that triggers more nausea sometimes, and that makes it very difficult. So even if it is something which is fresh, you don't know how fresh is it, how who is making it. And I really don't recommend people having juices. Instead, you have a fruit, have a fruit in the form of probably a fruit naturally by itself, or fruit yogurt, fruit in your dahi. Have all that, like a fruit custard, whatever, but do not load them with a lot of juices. It really creates a lot of discomfort in patients. So managing the side effects, because the biggest problem is that, as a dietitian, the problem is when, like I said, most often you enter the situation or the scene only after the patient has undergone a surgery, after the patient is on has finished 2 to 3 rounds of chemotherapy. So that is when the most common side effect is nausea, especially in chemotherapy. So that is when we ask them to include these soft, just keep chewing soft or soft water, small frequent meals, dry crackers. They really help. Second thing is constipation among some people. So psyllium husk really works wonders. Cooked vegetables, instead of having them a lot of raw stuff. So cooked vegetables, they also help. Diarrhea is again common, so so again, working on their gut is very important here. And mucositis, where you encourage more of soft foods, especially in upper GI related cancers, where you don't have a very strong flavored food. Some simple stuff, simple warm rasam, dal soup, these things, so that it does not trigger it more. So same thing again, the ancient principles also support the same. So Agni is called a digestive fire, or the gut that I was talking about. So including simple plant-based foods. The meal timing is very important even among cancer patients, because obviously they're already immunocompromised. Their metabolism may not be great. So, kind of forming that nutritional discipline is important. Whether you're a cancer patient, here specifically, I'm talking about cancer, but otherwise that nutritional discipline is important, because what happens is there is obviously a biological clock running, right? So you every day change the pattern, the body's compliance is not so great. So the highlights are, yes, working on the person's gut health is important. Moving towards, plant-based diet really helps, because naturally we are cutting down on a lot of inflammation coming in from the non-veg, because again, you don't know what kind of meat that is, and what kind of, what kind of hormones are induced into that meat, especially chicken and mutton, especially the red meat part of it. And then trying to include anti-inflammatory foods. That is, again, anti-inflammatory is not one particular food, but your local simple traditional cuisine, and trying to overall balance everything, right? That's very important. So when supplements are necessary, because this is a very common question I get, these are the very important reasons when we give supplement. So loss of appetite, somebody who's in a very hypermetabolic state, a lot of deficiencies where it's very significant, very severe, where diet takes a lot of time to show, where if they are already on the verge of entering sarcopenia. So how do you know all this? Is when you do a screening through that PGSGA. So you have a number, so out of this number, if you get a particular number, you understand that where they stand. So then, yes, we have to use supplements depending on the score that they get. So, nutrition is a powerful thing. It has always been there, and it's just that we can call it a powerful adjunct. Indian foods are naturally inherently therapeutic. So, the simple thing what we all have to do is maybe get back to old habits, maybe get back to our kitchens, because everything is, all the solutions are available there. Early screening, like I've been saying from the beginning, along with personalized nutrition, gives you a very good outcome. So at least you will be having a good quality life. So whatever the medicine does is again a secondary thing, but from the nutritional bit of it, at least your energy levels will be better. Your response to the medication will also be better. So thank you for a patient hearing. So yeah, that's my number. I think I put it down, so you can always reach out in case you have you need any detailed consultation, or if you have any short questions, I'm very happy to take them here.
Ma'am, there is a question.
Yeah.
Spruti is asking, is it true we shouldn't be having curd at night every day? Our parents keep saying that all the time.
Yeah, so curd comes with a particular amino acid profile. So curd is always best had when in the afternoon. It's always better to have buttermilk in the night because that has tryptophan as an amino acid which gets better absorbed. So curd in the night is not advisable. So if it's in the night, you can have buttermilk. How do you appreciate incorporating high fat diets in patients with cachexia? So high fat again till what level? So cachexia again depends on what is the score when you do the PGSGA and also loss of appetite. Okay, so PGSGA score will give me an idea of how much, how poor, how strong is the cachexia, and then depending on again their oral intake and tolerance, high fat. We cannot give something like a keto diet, that's not advisable, but maybe you can increase the fat from a normal individual, from a normal cancer recommendation to a little bit. But a very high fat diet can again hamper their liver parameters, or again give them your other side effects like gut related issues and all of that. So it's not going to be like a keto, but something where a little no, a little above than the cancer normal cancer recommendation. So the fat percentage maximum can go up to 35-40% if it's a very strong cachexia. But the carbs cannot be cut down. I mean, there has to be some amount of complex carbs coming in from the diet. Um, are there any more? I think I'm just
Yes, ma'am.
missing.
Yes, ma'am. Shall I read it out for you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Priya is asking, are there any specific assessments for evaluating gut health in cancer patients beyond standard nutritional questionnaires? What tools or diagnostic tests would you recommend for monitoring gastrointestinal function during treatment?
So there is a specific screening done. That's what is called a PGSGA, which is done for a cancer patient as well. And specific after doing the PGSGA, you have a cancer oriented, depending on what kind of cancer you have. There is a particular screening or a questionnaire for that. So the first basic one is PGSGA, and after that you can go to a specific type of a questionnaire or a specific cancer specific screening. What tools or diagnostic test do you recommend for GI function? GI, I think the most common test that we suggest is we check their liver parameters, and also very importantly their lipid, especially the lipid profile. That is the LFT and the lipid profile. So GI again is a big thing. So are you talking about the upper GI, lower GI matters? So but that is the test that we recommend, but the tools again depends on their oral intake, what kind of food they're having, the kind of food, whether you're a vegetarian, non-vegetarian, your lifestyle. So GI depends totally on these factors, your stress also. So these are the factors that we check.
And
Yeah.
ma'am, someone is asking, please let me know about neutropenic diet.
Neutropenic diet is nothing but you focus on all those foods which are going to increase your immunity. So immunity based foods, where basically it's a balanced diet which where there is more focus on increasing your WBC, your neutrophils. That's why the word neutropenic. So basically there is no one particular food that increases your immunity. That's the reality. It's all about your overall lifestyle, which is your stress management, your exercise, your food, the timing of the food, the kind of food that you take. Like I explained, everything, a balance of everything, your macros and micros. That is a neutropenic diet. Obviously
And ma'am,
avoiding your packaged foods and anything which, like I was mentioning in the beginning, where you're not having something which is homemade but resorting to a pastry once in a week. So cutting down on all these you know individualistic chosen indulgences.
And now we have one more question. How gut microbes affect the anti-cancer drug and how to prevent it?
So, gut microbes don't affect the anti cancer drug. The cancer drugs, what happens is, as a part of the treatment, the good gut microbes get flushed out. So, gut microbes are affected due to the anti cancer drugs. So, which happens in case of any simple antibiotic also. You take antibiotic, and obviously, the good microbe is also flushed out, in a span of 3 to 5 days. So that is why you intervene from the very beginning, work on your gut health. That is when your fermented foods, your curd, your buttermilk, your idli, dosa, all those natural homemade foods come into picture so that your gut microbes, the good microbes, are happy. So that even if you're on a very strong anti cancer drug, you do not end up having a nausea or a bloating or some form of an IBS or an intolerance.
Yes, ma'am. And what diet should pediatric patients follow and any specific diet for FN pediatric patients?
Pediatric is a different ball game altogether because here we look at a lot of parameters. So we have to work in conjunction with a pediatrician. Pediatric, we also have to see the growth milestones of a kid, right? So pediatric is what age, the age group matters, and the child's growth also matters. So the diet here is a very different diet. There is no like a one line answer to this, depending on what cancer that kid has, depending on which part of the cancer, in which part of the body has cancer, what is the kid's weight, what is the kid's developmental milestone, all of this comes into picture. So pediatric is a very sensitive topic. You have to deal it with care. You cannot compromise on the child's growth here, growth in terms of physical, attaining the milestones, everything.
Yes, ma'am. And Tanma is asking what should be the diet for a patient who recently had oral surgery 1 day ago and is a known case of type 2 diabetes mellitus. What kind of fruit juice can the patient have?
Yeah, so if it is again recently oral, see, oral we always start with initially liquid foods. If that person is able to handle it well, then slowly within a day or two they progress into soft diet. But again, case of type 2 diabetes, so liquid diet, it doesn't really matter. Again, oral, how bad, how, what is the surgery, what kind of surgery is gone through, what is the tolerance, all of that matters. But if it's a general answer that I'm giving because I don't know the history and I don't know what are the details, initially start with liquid diet and then they progress into soft diet. Type 2 diabetes comes only into question when they start having a little bit of semi solid kind of food. That is when you need to make sure what kind of carbs you're giving. You cannot just give them a lot of rice ganji and rice stuff. And fruit juices, initially I would not advise it. Again, depends on the blood sugar. Instead, give them more of electrolytes, and first see how stable the sugars are, first see how he's able to tolerate. Because if he's on a liquid diet, first, the first priority will be to see the progress from a liquid diet to soft diet, and then see the recovery, and then looking at the blood sugar, then you can think of a diabetic diet. But a fruit juice initially would not be advisable. So it depends on the progress, it depends on how good the transition is.
And Mallikarjun is asking, Ma'am, what's your thought on nutrigenomics? Is it really helpful to individualize diet recommendations for cancer patients?
Nutrigenomics is still under a lot of, I think, supervision. It is still not developed in India. We really don't have many tools to understand which kind of genes are really playing a role in affecting cancer. It is coming up in places like London, UK specifically, and America. But again, there have not been many clinical trials on this. This is just still in talks. It is still under, they're still trying to understand this on baboons and on rats. Now from rats they have gone up to baboons. So still in India it's not a very known thing. We do not really have clarity as to which gene is contributing. There are a lot of speculations in this aspect. So yes, if nutrigenomics comes up big time in India, and if you really know in Indian scenario, because a lot of literature that you see is always written in the Western literature. It's usually the studies done in UK or US, but in Indian concept or in Indian scenario, if we really get good data and if clinical trials are done, then definitely it's going to be a game changer for the dietetics fraternity, because then you can really see which gene is getting triggered or altered, and then the foods analysis becomes very easier. So yeah, so it's a very budding and an upcoming thing.
Yes, ma'am. And Shaheen is asking how much red meat is considered safe per week for someone with chronic gastritis or duodenal ulcers.
Okay, Shaheen, for a chronic gastric or duodenal ulcer, it's not at all recommended. So maybe not even per week. I would say maybe once in a month if the person is really a fan, but still red meat in any form is not recommended. So with ulcers, I would definitely not recommend it at all.
Yes, ma'am. And Priya is asking, are there any clinical trials showing whether nutrition screening programs improve survival rates in cancer patients?
Nutrition screening programs are there, but survival rate is not directly connected. What we can say is maybe the compliance rate, or when you do a nutritional screening, the compliance of a patient to in the entire journey becomes better, and the quality of life is better. But survival rate and nutrition screening cannot is not directly proportional, because the survival rate depends on a lot of other factors. But yeah, what I can say is the quality of life and the compliance and their nutritional profile, or the way they handle or respond to the treatment, becomes much, much better than somebody who has never had a nutritional screening at all. Because, like I said, in that case, we only enter at the end, and then, we have very little to contribute. So, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. And someone is asking, how reliable is weight as an indicator when fluid retention, ascites, or edema are present?
Yeah, weight is not, you cannot really count down the weight then, because weight is a very deceiving parameter, especially when ascites, fluid retention, and all of that. We generally look at the waist is to hip ratio, because when they lose that fluid, then the waist and the hip ratio is much more a better indicator, because weight will not give me the actual, it's not the right indicator.
Yes, ma'am. I think this is the last question. Is the concept of vitamin B17 used in onco patients?
No, not yet. Yeah, not yet in India. All this is still happening. Not yet in India. In India, people don't even want to take B12. They don't even want to take vitamin D, because in India, I see this is a realistic and a sad story where they're already financially so burdened that you give them another tablet to take, like an iron or vitamin D. Also, they don't want to take. So B17 is still very unheard of.
And we have one more question, ma'am, by Meghana. How is nutritional status assessed during chemotherapy?
So, nutritional status assessment, again, there is a particular nutritional screening profile for that. So, so the basic for everything is PGSGA, after which you have a different screening profile for exclusive chemotherapy. So, in chemotherapy, there are again certain questions depending on your oral intake, how much of weight you're losing. If you're a female, then, are you still menstruating? All of those things. So, the nutritional status, basically, there are four parameters how you assess nutritional status, which is A, B, C, D: anthropometric, biochemical, clinical, and dietary. Anthropometric is your body measurements. So, like I said, your MUAC, mid upper arm circumference, especially in chemotherapy, that's what we check, because your mid upper arm, actually, basically your bicep, right, basically tells you the muscle. So, if you have a very decreasing, dropping mid upper arm circumference, that shows that you're losing muscle. Your waist and hip is the next indicator, because like somebody asked me, is the weight correct indicator? That's not true. Then you have biochemical, which is the blood test parameters, and then you have the clinical signs. You see the skin, you see the hair, and then you have the dietary recall. So A, B, C, D are the main four important things, which we keep using it in different questionnaires.
And we have one more question, ma'am. Can red meat increase the risk of colon cancer for patients with ulcers?
Yes, possible. It is possible.
And I think that's all for the question and answer session. Thank you for answering all the questions with so much of patience, ma'am. And thank you
Thank you
for
for having
the
me.
insightful session and for your clear explanations and practical guidance, truly highlighting how impactful the right nutrition can be during cancer care. We appreciate your knowledge and your perspective. Thank you for sharing your perspective with us. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Bye bye.
Thank you, ma'am. As we wrap up the day 5 of
Yes.
Oncology Pharmacy Conclave 2025, I extend a heartfelt thanks to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Sharanya, for sharing her knowledge and expertise with us, and a big thanks to all the participants for your engagement, enthusiasm, and commitment to learning. And as we end up,
Rachna,
uh, ma'am,
Rachna, 1 second.
yes,
One
ma'am.
second. Guys, there was one question, right, regarding that somebody was asking about GI symptoms, how gut microbiome is getting disturbed because of chemotherapy. One small, I'll tell you something. Listen, all the chemotherapeutic drugs act on actively dividing cells. Which cells are actively dividing in our body? Hair, skin, GI. That is the reason you will see most of the adverse effects are seen are something related to J. That's why nausea, vomiting. Because the characteristic feature between normal cells and cancer cells is active division. They are useless cells and these are our body cells. That is the reason you see these common adverse effects. When GI is disturbed, automatically the gut microbiome also get disturbed. So, how you tolerate chemotherapy and how far or how severe the adverse effects are seen by patients, you will have to evaluate after every cycle. And then you will have to alter the diet accordingly. And if your diet and appetite is good, that means you are tolerating the treatments well. And that will lead to completion of the treatment. So, and nutrition plays a very important role. And somebody asked something related to diet regarding pediatrics. In terms of pediatric diet and all, usually most of the pediatric cancers are hematological cancers. In hematological cancers, when you are giving diet to people, mainly during the induction therapy, you avoid dry fruits, coconut water, raw vegetables, raw fruits, everything. They are given highly neutropenic diet with very less salt, highly boiled, well cooked food, and it is not even touched because hematological patients are highly immunosuppressed. So once the induction treatment is done and then they are recovering, then they'll have normal diet, not even non-veg and all. Purely most of it is vegetarian diet with boiled eggs and all. They used to prefer only when the patient recovers without neutropenia or without disturbing WBC, they come back to normal diet. There is no specific dietary restrictions in pediatric patients. Okay, milk products, everything is avoided. And you may ask, ma'am, how will they survive? So most of them it is given as IV IV nutrition because there will be so much of mucositis and they'll not be even in a stage to eat during the treatments. Okay, and once the babies recover, you give them a normal diet. So there is no restriction after induction chemotherapies. Okay, guys, I think you understood. And here on the call you have Dr. Dr. Ritesh, and myself. As of now, if you have any other questions related to clinical pharmacy, how a pharmacist can involve in oncology settings, what all you want to know, you can please ask. Or you can even type in the chat box. Rachna will read out and will clear all the doubts. And as informed, Dr. Ajit sir will take his part tomorrow. Okay, Rachna, they can I'll tell you, labile different types of cells. Yes, labile cells are continuously they are in division, and stable cells are something like liver and kidney. Okay, that is the reason you won't see immediate effects. You see, your liver does not grow every day, and you don't give a different shape to your body because they are stable cells. But when there is a liver transplant and when a person donates liver, what will happen? He needs to grow. At that time, liver cells will start division. Permanent cells are something like neuronal cells and cardiac cells. That is the reason if there's any damage to cardiac tissue or if there's any compromise to the function, it won't revert back. You see, if something happens, if there is hypoxia to your brain, there is some damage to your brain cells, and then there is no recovery. You can only prevent the further damage, but you cannot reverse the
Ma'am, your voice is breaking.
damage.
Ma'am, ma'am, your voice is breaking.
You understand? 'Cause
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt. Your voice is
no?
breaking. No, ma'am.
Now it is audible?
Yes, ma'am, it is audible, but it is not so clear.
Not so clear. Okay, if any question, see, I told you about stable cells, level cells, was that clear?
Yes, ma'am. Now we are not able to hear you, ma'am.
You can hear me now. Any questions they can ask. Rashmi, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Signals here, but I'll answer the questions.
Sure,
They can
ma'am.
ask me.
Guys, please drop your questions. If you
Don't
have
you have
any
any other
doubts,
questions
ma'am
that you
will be
want to
answering.
know?
Ma'am, I think they don't have any other questions.
Okay, if they don't have any other questions, it's fine. Even if still they have, because we have time till tomorrow, you can send it in the group if you have, and they'll forward it to us and you'll get your answers.
Ma'am, we got a question now. Is it good to focus on one type of cancer to build our career?
See, a small thing I'll tell you. Most of the drugs used in all the cancers are similar. So even you focus only on one cancer. If you want, you can work on solid tumors or hematology and bone marrow transplants. But it is not so difficult that you need to focus only on one cancer. If you ask me, it's all overall. It's all the same drugs that you are dealing with. But it differs in the way you deal with each drug in different cancers. Most of the cancers you will see treating with paclitaxel, carboplatin, adriamycin, cyclophosphamide. The same drugs you see in BMT, but you see high-dose cyclophosphamide given in some regimen. So you have to just understand how each drug is used with different combination of regimens, how the patient face adverse effects, something like that. There is nothing that you will focus only on one cancer for your career.
Ma'am, and there is one more question. Ma'am, what is the role of Tisleximab in CA of lung?
I think as of now that is not used in India. It's all in clinical trials if you see. This drug I have not seen in my practice and all the drugs are not used in India.
Yes, ma'am. And we have one more question by Ankit. JB regimen for non-metastatic GCT in pediatric patients.
What do you want to know about the JEP regimen?
JB regimen for non-metastatic GCT.
That's what I'm asking. What you exactly want to know about the regimen?
Is it? He's asking if it is rational.
What?
If the therapy is rational.
Till now, we have not given this regimen in our setup for any patients. I have not seen these patients. with this regimen, I have not administered because in pediatrics, I have dealt with ALL, AML, these things, but I have not dealt with this patient till now, and I have not seen this regimen in practice. Now, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello,
Ma'am, and
ma'am.
we have,
Hello, ma'am.
Hello?
Yeah, this is Dr. Pavan.
I think Dr. Pravalika is facing some network issues. So she'll be answering your questions even tomorrow, or you can reach out to her also. Uh, I think we can wrap up today's session. A big thank you to all of your participants for your engagement, enthusiasm, and commitment to learning. Good night, and thank you for being with us today.
Rachna, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible now. I think
Dr. Pavan, you are here?
I think
Hello?
many of them have left, ma'am.
Okay, Rachna, ask them to pose the questions. If anything, we will answer, okay?
Yes, ma'am. I've informed them that you will be answering tomorrow also.
Yes, ma'am. We can continue tomorrow. We've informed them.
Yeah, because the signals are very weak in my place right now.
Yes, ma'am. We've already informed them that if they have any query, they can post it in the group or get back to us tomorrow in the session.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Archana.
Thank you, ma'am.